Hey, it's Cami! 英語を勉強するなら、英語だけを使って勉強するのが効果的と聞いたことあるかもしれません。では、なぜそれが効果的なのでしょうか？初心者でも日本語を使わず英語だけで勉強できるでしょうか？独学でやるならどうすればいいでしょうか？今日はベルリッツの教師マネージャーを務めるジェレミーさんにお話を聞いてきました。ジェレミーさんは14年間ベルリッツで英語とドイツ語を教えており、その前はロンドンで英語教師をしていました。日本語を使わずに言語を学習することはなぜ効果的なのかや、初心者の方や独学で学んでいる方でも英語だけで学習できる理由について話しました。英語力をより早く上達させたい方はぜひご覧ください。Hi, Jeremy. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Today we're going to be talking about learning English or learning any language completely in the target language. And I know that you're particularly interested in this and you've got a lot of great advice about it. So I'm really looking forward to asking you some questions about it.
Thank you.
I was wondering if first off you could introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Jeremy. I was born in the UK and I grew up both in English and German-speaking countries, so I'm bilingual English and German. I teach English and German. I've been at Berlitz for about 14 years, but before that I taught at two other eikaiwas here in Japan. And before that, I was an English and business English teacher in London.
Can you tell me, how did you become interested in teaching in the target language only?
Well, in London, we did not translate, obviously, so we always taught in the target language. And I found that worked really well, actually. In fact, we tried to persuade our students to not translate themselves, so to use same language dictionaries, for example, rather than translating to their own language.
Was there any kind of moment where something that made you really, really appreciate this teaching style?
Actually, it was fairly recently. I was assessing a new German student, and she was a beginner. And during the introduction, she asked me about how we go about it. And I mentioned that we don't translate, it's total immersion. And she was very skeptical and almost left at that moment. And I persuaded her to stay for a demo lesson. And we just started with basic greetings and introducing ourselves. And she was absolutely amazed at the end. And yeah, she was very surprised that it worked and that she understood what was going on without speaking a word of German.
So what was she able to achieve at the end of the demo lesson?
Well, basic greeting and self-introduction. So same as in English, you would say, "Hi, my name is Jeremy. What's your name? How are you? I'm fine." And yeah, we achieved that within 15 to 20 minutes, and she was very confident by the end.
You mentioned that this student was doing a demo lesson for German.
Yes.
And I would be nervous too, because German is a very, very complicated language. How do you actually get somebody to have a conversation in entirely German when they don't have any foundation?
I think the key is to build it up slowly. Start with a situation they understand. So if it's your first German lesson, then obviously you're going to greet each other and introduce yourselves. And if you build up the language step by step and practice it with them, then that's the most comfortable way of doing it.
Are there any other benefits of learning a language in the target language only?
Oh, absolutely. As you know, when we translate from one language to the other, our translations are always sort of they're not accurate. Their words don't mean exactly the same thing. So you learn a language through translation, you will always learn your version of it. Say if a Japanese student will learn a Japanese version of English, they will never fully understand the full meaning of vocabulary, right?
Because there's so many things that you can't directly translate as well, right?
Exactly. So learning in the target language means that you are immersing yourself in that language, in that culture, and you're seeing objects or situations as they are in the real world, and then matching the vocabulary to it. It's basically the same as babies learn, right? When a baby or an infant starts learning a language, it doesn't recognize it as a language. It recognizes it as naming things around them, right? So I noticed that myself growing up bilingual. My sister and I would speak German to each other, but to our parents, we would speak English. So if one of our parents walked in while we were playing or chatting with each other, we would automatically switch to English. The moment they left the room, we would switch back to German. And we wouldn't think about it. It's not a language as far as kids are concerned.
Yeah.
Seeing that with my own children, they speak Japanese and English. When I asked them to translate something when they were younger, they were unable to do it. Even though they understood both languages perfectly, children need to learn to connect the equivalent and therefore can't translate at the beginning.
I notice the same when I'm learning Japanese. A lot of the time I'll pick up new words just because I hear them so many times in the right context, then I'll just know what it means. And if someone asked me to translate it, I wouldn't be able to translate it into English most of the time.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So you mentioned that you have experience teaching in other countries and also at other language schools. Did you learn any different teaching styles?
Well, yes, there's two main different styles that I experienced. One of them was using a textbook where we use text and vocabulary and grammar exercises to teach a language. In this form, we usually expected the student to read the text regardless of knowing all the vocabulary or not, and then help them figure out what they thought the missing words actually meant. Unfortunately, this often meant that they would then go to their dictionary and just look up the words, and we would encourage them to use English dictionaries. And I guess sort of the overall goal was to finish a book unit or the book itself or a level, which would sometimes take several months or even longer. Therefore, keeping your motivation going is much more difficult. In some of the Ikaiwas I worked in, students expected to just learn the language through chit-chat. They just wanted to have a friendly conversation each week. And I found that in particular was the most demotivating for students because they didn't feel they were making any progress.
That's interesting because I guess that having just a conversation is also practical experience and you're learning in the target language, right? So, but how was it demotivating to do that?
Well, it's like just learning one skill and practicing that one skill over and over and over. And during assessments, I will often see that. I will start an assessment and think, oh, they've actually got quite good English. But then if I probed into a particular situation, that's where their skill runs out, basically. So I think choosing a variety of skills that are specific to a goal, like, for example, if they're going on a business trip, they need to buy tickets for trains or they need to check in for a flight, then specifically focusing on that one skill can give them the instant feedback, I've just learned something.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think especially like if you live in another country and you don't actively study, you might have the same problem where you will probably have very similar conversations on a daily basis and you can get by using the vocabulary that you know, but you don't actually feel any growth because you're just getting by. with what you know. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes when people are looking to study a new language and they're thinking about how to study, something that might concern them is if you want to study with a native speaker of English and speak to them face to face or online, many people might feel that they're not quite ready for that because they don't have the foundation of language. So maybe a complete beginner would prefer to study, just grammar and vocabulary first. Have you ever heard of these kind of problems at the Language Centre, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's very common, of course, and there's various reasons for it. We don't want to make fools of ourselves. We don't want to be in a stressful situation where we might not understand what's going on. And I think it's also a misunderstanding of how language works. A lot of students believe, well, if I learn, say, 200 words and basic grammar structures, then it's like a mathematical problem. I just replace words and I can communicate. And unfortunately, language doesn't work that way because we use language as a form of communication. I think what students need to understand or trust is that they actually already know the world around them. We all know what a bicycle is. We all know what a table is. We all know what love is. And what the student just doesn't know is how to name it. And I think that's the teacher's job, to introduce language in a way that we are invoking an image in their mind or a feeling and then naming what it is. And like that, they get the immediate connection between the vocabulary and what they're trying to say. When we train new teachers, for example, the most difficult thing for teachers to learn is that if you explain vocabulary, it is much more difficult because you're doing the reverse process. Whereas if you first show them an image or give them the feeling of love or happiness or fear or whatever you're trying to name, and then naming that, they have a clear image of it, and you're just adding the vocabulary to it rather than giving them a word. And then, in that situation, you might feel like that. We have maybe an ambiguous situation then. That's what we used to do in London mainly. We would give them a text and say, read this, then answer some comprehension questions. So we are expecting the student to figure out what they think the word might mean that they don't know, right? Which of course is also a very good skill, but it's much more difficult. And if we assume that everybody has the same experience of the world, everyone feels hunger, everyone knows what a bicycle is, all we have to do is name it in the target language, then we're making it much easier, aren't we?
You mentioned everyone has the same knowledge of the world, everyone has the same experiences, but I can imagine as your level gets higher, it can be a little bit more complex than being like 10, right?
Yes. Well, if you develop language out of a situation or towards a specific goal, then you are learning that version of that word. And you might find in a later lesson that same word comes up in a different situation. And so you, bit by bit, you will piece the different translations to it. With the translation method, we often go towards the idea, okay, this word translates as this, and it also translates as this, and then it also translates. So we're getting a lot of unnecessary information at a time when we just need the one translation of it.
I guess it would be similar to learning a new word in your own language, right? You'll learn it first in one context and you'll understand it as that. And then later on, you might learn it in a different context for a different use, and slowly you piece it together.
Yes, exactly, yes.
So my next question for you, as someone who has a lot of experience teaching at Berlitz and teaching languages in general, what do you think makes a successful lesson, and how can you achieve that?
Good question. I think our students are particularly interested in that, isn't it? I feel that a good lesson is when the student understands the language, but a really successful lesson is when they walk out feeling, I've just learned a new skill, rather than I understand, but I need to practice. And I think that's where our method is so successful, because if the lesson runs smoothly and everything goes as planned, the student really leaves with 1 or 2 new skills that they can immediately apply in the real world. Say, for example, the goal is buy a ticket at a train station, then they would be able to walk out, go to the train station and buy a ticket in English directly after the lesson, rather than feeling they have to go home and study more to get there. Setting yourself a clear goal at the beginning of each lesson, and it needs to be an achievable goal, is probably the most effective way of learning. Often students will come to us because they have a need to study the language, either for a business trip or a presentation or an upcoming meeting or something like that. And they see that as their goal. But that goal can be quite far and sometimes even unrealistic, right? So breaking it down to start at the level that you are at and then slowly building it up, I think is far more rewarding.
If you're working by yourself for setting goals, can you give an example of a kind of study goal?
Yes, I think setting yourself a goal that is achievable and useful to you, and only focusing on the language that you need to achieve that without any distractions will lead you to successfully completing that much quicker.
So I know that some people don't have the time or they don't have the money right now to take actual lessons. If they want to self-study, can they do target language only?
Absolutely. I think the key to target language only, either with a teacher or at home, is setting a realistic goal for each session and doing it at the right level. It is so easy to try and push yourself to go beyond your level because you think you'll get there faster. Quite the opposite is true. Find your own level and then just add a little bit to that. Make it just a little uncomfortable. And like that, you're going to achieve your goal much faster.
Would you say that it's also good sometimes to start off even a little bit lower than your level to get in to build confidence?
Absolutely. I think language learning is not just vocabulary and grammar. It's like Ellie said in a previous interview, it's intonation, it's context, it's everything. And it includes also fluency and confidence. So starting at your level or slightly below will allow you to build all those things and make it much more natural. And then it's much easier to add to that, isn't it?
Do you recommend any specific types of materials, for example, textbooks or watching something in particular?
I would recommend to choose a variety of different things, try them out and see which works best. With self-studying, it's very easy to lose motivation or get frustrated. So choosing something you actually enjoy. So if you're not into finance, by all means, don't read the Financial Times. So choose podcasts that you might be interested in. Choose a book that maybe you enjoyed as a kid. Now read it in the target language. Choose things that are fun for you.
One of the most important things is just to keep up your motivation and keep going and stay confident about what you're achieving, right?
Absolutely.
I think the main thing that I learned from you today was that definitely learning without translation and picking up things through context is definitely the most natural way to learn a language.
I do think so, yes.
And learning things a little bit below or at your level is also so incredibly important. And I'm excited to try and apply these things when I'm studying Japanese as well. Thanks everybody for watching and see you in the next video.
Bye.
動画をご覧いただきありがとうございました。 ベルリッツのブログにも英語学習のアドバイスの記事が載っていますので、より詳しく読みたい方はぜひ参考にしてみてください。自信を持って英語を話したい方はぜひチャンネル登録してくださいね。See you!